Okay, now we're going to talk about range. So I gave you two questions for domain. They were how far left, how far right. And I'm going to give you two questions for range. So anytime you're asked to find range from a continuous graph, you want to ask yourself how far down and how far up. Here are your two questions. So now we're going to look at the bottom row of examples. And we're going to start with an example that is two endpoints. So again, we're trying to find range. Range has to do with the y-axis, which is why we are looking at the up and down directions, because I want to read my values off of the y number line. We are no longer reading off the x because we're talking about range. Range is another word for y. So I'm going to ask myself, how far down do I need to go on the y-axis until my picture is stopped? And right here at -1, we're going to draw a boundary. And just like we did for domain, we are going to write our inequality. So I'm going to write y, and then I'm going to look, is my picture drawn above my boundary or below? And if you say above, that is the same as greater than. And what is it greater than? -1, because that's where we drew our boundary. And now I just have to ask myself, do I have a closed or an open point? That is a closed point, so I need a bar on my sign. Question number 2, how far up? Because we answered how far down, it goes as far down as -1. How far up? So I'm going to go up the y-axis, and how far up the y-axis is your picture drawn? And you can see it does not go above 3. That is as high up the y-axis as it goes, and again we're going to write an inequality. So y and 3, and at this boundary line, is your picture below or above this boundary line? And it's below, that is the same as less than. And then I need to ask myself, bar or no bar? Close point, bar. So my picture is y is greater than or equal to -1, y is less than or equal to 3. And now, just like with domain, I need to combine these into one final range answer. So we're going to do exactly like we did for domain. We're going to take the smaller number, which is -1, and we're going to switch the order of the -1 and y. You always swap the order of the smaller one when there are two. There have to be two. And now when I switch the order, I have to flip the sign, so it's going to become a less than or equal to. And then now I'm going to copy my other inequality. Since I already have the y copy down, all I have to do is copy the less than or equal to 3. And what does this mean? This means that any and every y value from -1 to 3 is used. I will not leave out -1, and I will not leave out 3 if we're making a list. So that means any number starting at 3 all the way down to -1, all of those numbers, all of those decimal and fraction values will be included in our list of range values. So now let's look at our second example. What does it look like when we have one endpoint and one arrow? So again, we're going to go back to our two questions. So I want to ask myself, how far down the y-axis does my graph go? And it goes all the way to 1. So I'm going to draw my boundary, and I'm going to write y and 1. And then I need to ask myself, is my graph drawn above my boundary line, or is it drawn below? And you can see it's drawn above. That is the same as greater than. And then I want to ask myself, closed or open point? Well, there are two closed points. You also have a solid line, which is all the same as a closed point, so we need a bar. So we have y is greater than 1. And now we're going to go and answer the question, how far up? So I stop at 3 here, but if you notice here, we have an arrow. And what does an arrow tell us? An arrow tells us that it keeps going up. Not only is it going up, it is also moving to the right, but I am only concerned with the up direction because, again, range has to do with up and down, not left and right. So I'm going up to positive infinity, which means I never stop going up. And since I only have one boundary line, my final range answer is y is greater than or equal to 1. It is the only inequality that I have written. And remember, when you have one inequality, you do not flip or switch the order. It stays just like it is. And what does this mean? This means that I'm using any and every y value greater than or equal to 1. Is used. So if I was making a list, I would start at 1. 1 would be included in my list, and I'm going to include every y value all the way to positive infinity. All of those y values are going to be included in my list. But again, we don't want to write that list out. There are way too many numbers, which is why we're going to use our inequalities to write that list. All right, the next example. We have no endpoints. We have 2 errors. So what does that look like for range? So again, if you notice, when your line is at a slant, you need to start thinking of that in 2 directions. So to go to this slant here down to the right, you're not only moving down, but you're also moving to the right. For this piece of the graph, to get it to slant upward, kind of like the start of a mountain,